Good day, friends. I'm Kerry Dillinger. This is Bible Class Topics. Today we're going to get our Bibles out, turn to Matthew 5, and take a close look at verses 38 through 48. Lord willing, next month, that is January of 2025, we're going to start a comprehensive study of Jesus and his Sermon on the Mount. But for now, this will be just a little introduction to that study. So let's get our Bibles out and dive in. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Let's talk about going the second mile. In New Testament times, Roman couriers were authorized to press into service any available person or beast to transport official documents. Still, they could not force or compel a citizen to go further than 1 mile. Jesus is citing this practice here in this passage. And he's telling his listeners, don't go 1 mile with bitter and obvious resentment. Instead, go 2 miles with cheerfulness and good grace. This text is a lesson on attitude, and we need to be living the attitude of the second mile. Let's compare the first mile to the second mile. Let's begin with mile number 1. It is a mile of compulsion. When we look up the word compel, or as we read in the ESV today, force, it comes from a Greek word, aggareeuein, and according to Vine's Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words, it means to impress into service. An example of this in the New Testament will come as Jesus is carrying his cross to be crucified, and the Roman soldiers compel Simon of Cyrene to finish the job. See Matthew 27:32. Those who claim to be Christians but who have the attitude of the first mile often ask questions such as, why should I do more? How many church services do I have to attend to be faithful? How much do I have to give? How much work do I have to do? Do I have to attend these extra services that come about sometimes, especially in the spring and the fall? Those who raise such questions betray a false concept of service to God. They're trying to see how little they can get by with and still be regarded as faithful in God's sight. In reality, it's a matter of dedication and commitment. 1 mile service is not adequate in God's eyes. What about the second mile? The second mile is more difficult, for it's a mile of grace. It's a display of goodness and kindness. It is accomplished by love for the Lord. Listen to John 14:23. Jesus says, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him." And then the Apostle John himself writes in his first letter, chapter 4, verse 18, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love." Those who travel the second mile have an attitude of, "What more can I do? I want to do more." This attitude is illustrated in 1 Corinthians 15:58, where Paul writes, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, be immovable, be always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." The word abound here literally means to overflow, to excel, to exceed. Compare this attitude with what we find in Luke chapter 6, verses 37 and 38. Jesus says, "Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." The attitude of the second miler is to be about their Father's business. We see other applications of this attitude as we look at verses 38 and 39. I've already clicked ahead. We'll talk about turning the other cheek for just a minute. When we hear this, turn the other cheek, we understand this is a personal challenge to a duel. And it's an injury, because it hurts, and it's an insult as well. Note how Jesus responded to his trials before the Sanhedrin and Pilate, where he underwent both insults and injury. You might want to pause the video and go read John chapter 18 and 19. And then you might want to continue pausing the video and read Paul's account of his suffering as an apostle in 2 Corinthians 11, verses 16 through 29. When we turn the other cheek, we do not have the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth mentality. We cannot let ourselves sink to that level. We have to be willing and able to rise above a personal affront. When sued for your tunic, let them have your cloak, Jesus says in verse 40 of our reading. According to the law of Moses, the cloak could not be taken from a man. Listen to Exodus 22, 26, and 27. "If ever you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that's his only covering, and it's his cloak for his body. And what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate." The Christian never stands upon his rights because he considers others before he considers himself. In verse 42, Jesus says, "Give to the one who asks. Do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow." And this is the attitude one should have toward the needs of others. Jesus is evidently speaking of those who are truly needy. Paul gives a few warnings in his letters. We'll look at 1 Timothy 5:8 and 2 Thessalonians 3:10. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. In 2 Thessalonians 3:10, "For even when we were with you, we would give you this command, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat." Therefore, as we give to the needy, the truly needy, we cannot encourage sin or slothfulness. And one's attitude must be proper toward those in need. The Christian is not to be selfish or revengeful. Instead, the Christian is to be liberal and generous. Liberal and generous even to the point of loving your enemy. That's what Jesus says in verses 43 through 48. This refers to those that hate you. When we look up the word for love here, it's agapeo. It means to love, to be full of goodwill, and exhibit the same interest in others' welfare. You know, anyone can love the loving, but Jesus says, loving the unlovable will take a second-mile attitude. In closing, Jesus says, so you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty. Luke 17, verse 10. The second mile is not an option. We must go the second mile. It's not easy, but it is rich with reward for those that would follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Our outline today comes from Gene Taylor over at expositorysermonoutlines.com, and our photo of a man walking, perhaps the second mile, is on Unsplash, and the photo was put up there by Olia Gaza. Thank you for your support. Come back and be with me again soon. Lord willing, as we said at the beginning of this video, we want to start a comprehensive study of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, and we'll also look over into Luke's Gospel for some points to make as well. We hope to start that perhaps the first week of January 2025. Let's be careful out there. It's that time of year when things get hectic. Let's love our families. Let's love the Lord. Let's love our church families. Until we meet again, may God bless.